Classic theories, development as growth, and the linear stages of theories. The proponents, Rostow's stage of growth, and the Harrod-Domar's growth model. Rostow's stage of growth, nature, and description of the theory. A theory of development to which a country passes through sequential stage in achieving development. The next one is the transition from underdevelopment to development in terms of stages or steps. Rostow's stages of growth comments about that theory is it should follow the set of rules of development being compared to other models, argued about stages of development. Domar growth model, nature and description of the theory. A model that concerns about economic in terms of saving and investment. Relationship between the total sales of capital stock and the total GDP. The more the economy save and invest, it grows. Focus on the role of capital investment. The Harrod-Domar growth model comments about the theory, follows the stages and steps to see the economic growth of each country. Presented equation can be used to see economic growth. The more an economy is able to save and invest of a given GDP, the greater the growth of this GDP will be. Ratio isn't fixed but change over time.
So hello everyone, my topic is about the structural change model. So I am Joy Rabamba. So the topic is the Lewis theory of development. So the Lewis theory of development is proposed by W. Arthur Lewis. So the nature and description of the theory is it is one of the best known early theoretical models of development. It focused on the structural transformation of a primary subsistence economy. It became the general theory of the development process in the surplus labor developing nation. Also, at the constant urban wage, the supply curve for a rural labor to the modern sector is perfectly elastic. It focuses on the sequential process through which the economic, industrial, and institutional structure of a underdeveloped economy is transformed over time to permit new industries to replace traditional agriculture as the engine of the economic growth. Also, a set of interrelated changes in the economic structures are required. So overall, the Lewis theory of development explains the growth of a developing economy in terms of labor transition between two sectors, which is the capitalist sector and the subsistence sector. It also states that unlimited supplies of a labor can be had at the prevailing subsistence wages. So my comment about the theory is that first, it does not fit the institutional and economic realities of most contemporary developing countries. Second, the Lewis two-sector model is only relevant to countries whose labor has been steadily absorbed from farming to manufacturing. Third, the Lewis two-sector model requires considerable modification in assumptions and analysis. And lastly, structural change analysis are basically optimistic that the correct mix of economic policies will generate beneficial patterns of self-sustaining growth. That's all. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am Nicole S. Galan and I'll be discussing the neo-colonial dependence model, which is the first stream of international dependence model. Neo-colonial dependence model is an indirect outgrowth of Marxist thinking. This refers to the dominance of the unequal power relationships between the center or the rich countries and the periphery, which is the developing countries. The central idea of this thinking is that the rich countries use their power such as political, economic power, and even international relationships and so on, and they keep exploiting the poor countries. As a result, The existence of underdevelopment in a highly unequal international capitalist system continues. The attempt of less developed countries to become self-reliant and progressive are suppressed by this relationship, because it came to be seen generally as involving a coordinated effort by former colonial powers and other developed countries, which results to block the growth in developing countries and retain them as, for example, sources of cheap raw materials and cheap labor. According to neo-colonial dependence model, underdevelopment and poverty is due to exploitative policies and interference of developed world. Because of continuing exploitative economic, political, and cultural policies of former colonial rulers towards less developed countries, this results to increased poverty and unequal distribution of wealth and income. The bottom line of this sub-theory is that, due to the direct and indirect economic control of the oppressors or rich countries, it leads to even lower levels of living and perpetuation of underdevelopment. It lays the blame for the existence of underdevelopment on the shoulders of the historical evolution of a highly unequal capitalist system of rich country and poor country relationships. Lastly, it is dominated by such unequal power relationships between the center and the periphery. That's all, thank you.
And now, let's proceed to the last topic. And it's all about neoclassical counter-revolution, market fundamentalism. First one is the challenging stated model, free markets, public choice, and market-friendly approaches. The theory that is being used is neoclassical counter-revolution theory, and the proponents are Lord Peter Bauer, Deepak Lai, Ian Little, Harry Johnson, Bella Blasa, Julian Simon, Jagdish Bhagwati, and Anne Kruger. Theory, it is emerged in the 1980s during political ascendancy of conservative governments of US, Canada, Britain, and West Germany. Neoclassicalists on the board of powerful international agencies, World Bank, and International Monetary Fund as influence of International Labour Organization, United Nations Development Programme, and United Nations Conference on Trade and Development eroded. Component approaches in this topic. First one is the pre-market approach. Markets alone are efficient. Competition is effective, technology and information freely available, and countless. Government is counterproductive. Is public choice approach. New political economy approach. Governments do nothing right because of selfish interest and selfish decision, misallocation of resources. Lastly, and the third approach is market-friendly approach. Imperfections in economy and need government for market-friendly interventions, social services, and climate for private enterprise. Acceptance of market failures. About the theory that is being used in this topic is market price allocation may be more efficient than state intervention, but emerging economics have fundamentally different structures. First one is the competitive free markets. Do not exist in general. Information is scarce, markets are fragmented, and so on. Second is the invisible hand frequently rises individuals who are already well off while failing to provide possibilities for upward mobility for the rest. To arrive at right pricing, use supply and demand research. Both markets and governments would likely fail in an environment of pervasive institutional rigidity and extreme socioeconomic disparity.
Good day, everyone. I am Farisha G. Bayabas, and I'm going to present the dualistic development thesis. The dualistic development thesis. It is under the International Dependence Revolution. It represents the existence and persistence of substantial and even increasing divergence between rich and poor nation and rich and poor people on various levels. Dualism is a concept widely discussed in development economics. The dualism is the coexistence of two situations or phenomena, one desirable and the other not, that are mutually exclusive to different groups of society. For example, extreme poverty and affluence, modern and traditional economic sectors, growth and stagnation, and higher education among a few amid large-scale illiteracy. The traditional concept of dualism embraces four case arguments. The first one is different sets of conditions of which are superior and other inferior can coexist. Example of this element of dualism include Lewis' notion coexistence of modern and traditional methods of production in urban and rural sectors. The coexistence of wealthy, highly educated elites with masses of illiterate poor people, and the dependence notion of the coexistence of powerful and wealthy industrialized nation with weak, impoverished peasants societies in the international economy. The second one is this coexistence is chronic and not merely transitional. It is not due to a temporary phenomenon, in which case time could eliminate the discrepancy between superior and inferior elements. In other words, the international coexistence of wealth and poverty is not simply a historical phenomenon that will be rectified in time. Although both the stages of growth theory and structural change models implicitly make such an assumption to proponents of the dualistic development thesis, the fact of growing international inequality seems to refute it. The third one is not only do the degrees of superiority or inferiority fail to show any signs of diminishing, but they even have inherent tendency to increase. An example of it is the productivity gap between workers in developed countries and their counterparts in most developing countries seems to widen with each passing year. The last one is the interrelation between the superior and inferior elements are such that our existence of the superior elements does little or nothing to pull up the inferior element, let alone trickle down to it. In fact, it may actually serve to push it down to develop its underdeveloped. And my comments about the theory is that the international coexistence of wealth and poverty is not simply a historical phenomenon that will be rectified in time. And the dualistic theory represents the existence and persistence of growing disparities between rich and poor nation or rich and poor people, as I said earlier. And that's all. Thank you.
International Dependence Revolution. Under this classic theory is the false paradigm model. This classic theory is proposed by Raul Prebisch, an Argentine economist known for his contributions to structural economics. Nature and description of the theory. Less radical international dependence approach. This means that it does not follow strong conviction and extreme principles, leading to unreliable information to based on. Arguing that Developing countries have failed to develop because their development strategies, usually given to them by Western countries, have been based on an incorrect model of development. Having this idea of relying on an incorrect model of development, applying this in real life situation, if we are not on the right track, even though our goal is to succeed, we might not be able to achieve it. One example of this is capital accumulation, market liberalization that are overemphasized without giving due consideration to needed social and institutional change. Emphasizes the removal of international domestic imbalances as the most effective way to deal with diverse social problems. Examples of diverse social problems are having people with different background, races, beliefs, and cultures. Offers a little formal or informal explanation on how countries initiate and sustain development. Comments about the theory. The possible reason why countries remain underdeveloped is that country could possibly not pursuing the correct economy policy or the government authoritarian is corrupt. Relying, relying with an incorrect model of development would cause the present and even the future situation of the nation or country. The international system might be hindering the growth of underdeveloped countries. No matter how eager a certain country to develop and grow, it could possibly happen that the system itself is the reason why it is having a difficult time. And for the last one, the unsuitable and misinformed advice might make the situation of a certain country even worse, which is why it has to be able to provide a necessary, relevant, credible, and accurate information to depend on in order to help the nation to develop. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I am Regine Alvartar, and I will be discussing the traditional neoclassical growth theory. The model of economic growth is a sub-theory of the neoclassical counter-revolution, market fundamentalism. The traditional neoclassical growth theory, for which Robert Solow of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology received the Nobel Prize, is probably the best-known model of economic growth. It explains how the combination of three driving forces, labor, capital, and technology, leads to a constant rate of economic growth. The Solow model differs from the Harrod-Domar or AK growth model in that it allows for capital and labor substitution. Nature or description of the theory. It is often called an exogenous growth model. This asserts that development is generated by technological progress rather than economic forces. Both capital and labor have declining returns, but constant returns to both components when combined. The relationship between the capital and labor of an economy determines its output. Diminishing returns reflect high levels of production, and the marginal cost begins increasing. There are constant returns when a stable state in which the capital, labor, and production are constant. Assume that technological progress was determined exogenously of all other factors in the model. The idea is that technological advancements have a significant impact on an economy and that economic growth cannot be sustained in increasing the output capabilities of labor. Uses an aggregate production function, y is equal to A times the function of KL, where Y is gross domestic product, K denotes capital stock, which may include both human and physical capital, L denotes labor, and A denotes labor productivity, which grows at an exogenous rate over time. Output growth is caused by an increase in labor quantity and quality due to population expansion and education. capital increase because of saving and investment, and technology advancement. The three factors indicate output growth when an economy's capital and labor resources are limited, but technology's contribution to economic growth is limitless. Introduction of closed and open economies. A closed economy is when no foreign commercial transactions or other economic ties with the rest of the world are in this economy. An open economy engages in international trade and maintains both financial and non-financial ties. Openness encourages increased access to foreign production ideas, which can accelerate technological innovation. If an economy is an open economy, this allows learning by watching or adopting ideas from foreign production, leading to technological advancements. Comments about the theory. The heavy-handedness of many developing country governments would hinder growth in the developing world's economies by limiting the influx of foreign investment. If a developing country is an expert such as in trades and foreign investment, economic growth is unlikely to be achieved and is therefore limited. Prices as signals and incentives can be used effectively to influence socially optimal resource allocations. Favorable prices allow resource allocations. Developing suitable economic policies, whether based on markets or enlightened government involvement, is a challenging task. It is said that many developing world economies find it challenging to develop suitable economic policies due to conflicting ideologies and value systems. In responding to local constraints, developing countries must embrace local solutions. Developing economies should examine local circumstances, since most probably some foreign ideas do not apply in the local situation, and so is the solution to the arising problem within the country. Although Solo's model better describes an established economy than a developing economy in some ways, it remains a fundamental reference point for growth and development literature. That will be all. Thank you po.